Point of departure: it is an error to consider social distress or physiological degeneration or the corruption of all things as the cause of nihilism. That's a critique of the later Freudian ideas right there and then, because what Nietzsche says was, look, if things are going wrong for you, or if they're going wrong in general, it's really straightforward to say that, well, there's something wrong with society, that would be social distress, or there's some physiological degeneration, there's something wrong with you physically, or everything is just corrupted, being itself is corrupt, which is a classic explanation, right? You hear that all the time. You think, well, people are suffering for one reason or another. Well, why? Well, there's something wrong biologically, or society is corrupted and everything is unfair. Nietzsche says, no, you're not going to get away with that. First he says, ours is the most honest and compassionate age, comparing modern civilization, let's say, to everything that has come before it. So speaking of corruption is not something you can do lightly. And then he says, and this is remarkable, distress, whether psychic, physical, or intellectual, need not at all produce nihilism. That is the radical rejection of value, meaning, and desirability. Such distress always permits a variety of interpretations. Well, that's a rough one. It's like, well, you had a rough childhood. Well, someone else who had your childhood might not have drawn those conclusions. So here's an example. You know that most people who abuse children were abused by as children, right? But most people who were abused as children do not grow up to abuse children. And you can figure that out arithmetically, because if it was the case that everyone abused grew up to abuse, in about 4 generations everyone would be being beat to death in childhood as a matter of course, because it would spread exponentially. That isn't what happens. It dampens. And why is that? Well, if you're bullied as a child, we could say, well, you could draw 2 conclusions, causal conclusions. Being bullied caused me to be a bully. Fair enough, man, that's an understandable story. How about being bullied caused me not ever to be a bully? Well, why is that any less reasonable a conclusion? It's frequently one that people draw, and since the 2 opposite conclusions can be drawn from the same set of experiences, you cannot say that the experiences caused the conclusions. And that's Nietzsche's critique of, say, sociological or psychological determinism with regards to the optimism or pessimism of your worldview. Such distress always permits a variety of interpretations. Right. Rather, it is in one particular interpretation, the Christian moral one, that nihilism is rooted. The end of Christianity, at the hands of its own morality, that was the development of the sense of truth, which cannot be replaced, which turns against the Christian God. The sense of truthfulness, highly developed by Christianity, is nauseated by the falseness and mendaciousness of all Christian interpretations of the world and of history. A remarkable claim. And then this one's even worse. It's absolutely brilliant, I think. Rebound from God is truth to the fanatical faith, all is false. That's nihilism, an act of Buddhism. And Nietzsche explains that. And this is, you know, I talked to you guys a little bit about the idea of the game and the metagame, you know, the metagame being the set of all games. Nietzsche draws on a conception like that for this criticism, because he says when you lose faith in something, and that happens to people very frequently, when you lose faith in something, because you're human and because you can abstract, it's not only that you lose faith in that thing, that person, that system. The fact that you've lost faith in that indicates to you that it's possible to lose faith in anything, in every system, in every person. Once burnt, forever shy. And that's nihilism. The fact that one thing can collapse on you can make you completely unwilling to manifest any faith in anything whatsoever. And that's the emergence of nihilism. The end of the moral interpretation of the world, which no longer has any sanction after it has tried to escape into beyond, leads to nihilism. Another critique of Christianity embedded in that sentence, he said, well, Christianity needed to be destroyed even by itself because it put so much emphasis on the afterworld, on heaven, that it forgot completely about life now and here. And because of that, needed to be destroyed, because life here is sufficiently rife with suffering, so it needs to be addressed. And people, it's wrong, it's incorrect to inform people that they should wait for some hereafter and justify their suffering in that manner. And so he would say in some sense that even the idea of compassion, which is central to Christianity, is also one of the reasons why Christianity collapsed under its own weight. The untenability of one interpretation of the world upon which a tremendous amount of energy has been lavished awakens the suspicion that all interpretations of the world are false. Well, so what? You might say, well, so what if you don't believe in anything? Well, I would take a neuropsychological approach to that. Most of the positive emotions, dopaminergic. It's a consequence of the manifestation of the exploratory system that has its roots in the hypothalamus, a very ancient part of the brain. It's the same part of the brain that cocaine and heroin, all the drugs that people like to abuse, the drugs that are exciting, not the drugs that are calming, it activates that system. It's the system that's activated when something exciting happens to you or when something novel happens to you. But more importantly, it's the system that's activated when you're pursuing a goal and you see that you're moving towards the goal. So what does that mean? No goal, no positive emotion. So you say, well, if you have nothing to believe in, if you have no value structure left, because a value structure says this is better than this, no value structure, no positive emotion. Well, and so what's the problem with that? It's easy to get rid of your positive emotion. That's not a problem because it's rather fragile and tenuous. Try getting rid of your negative emotion. Good luck. That is not going to happen. So what happens is that if your value system collapses, then all you're left with is negative emotion. And that is not a good thing. Well, so Nietzsche would say, well, why do people flee into the arms of totalitarians from the specter of nihilism? It's because totalitarian certainty, even though it involves slavery and the sacrifice of reason and intellect, totalitarian certainty might be preferable to nihilistic chaos. Well, it's a big problem. And he said, well, I'm telling the story of the next 200 years. It's like, well, ever since then, for the entire 20th century, we bounced between nihilism and totalitarianism with deaths on both sides, constant, and we're still doing exactly the same thing.